"This report has been falsified, sir." The words sliced through the boardroom like a sharp wind, stopping every movement mid-air. All eyes turned toward the doorway, where Maya Williams stood 17 years old, wearing a navy sweatshirt, hair in a neat braid, and a visitor badge dangling slightly askew from her neck. Her voice hadn't wavered, but the silence that followed her statement trembled with electricity. Richard Stratton, CEO of Stratton Capital Partners and Maya's godfather, looked up from the document on the table. His pen hovered just above the signature line. The boardroom had been bathed in quiet confidence. Only moments earlier, the final review of the company's quarterly financial report before its public filing. A historic IPO was days away. Investors were eager, reporters already circling. And now, this. "What did you say?" Richard asked, slowly straightening in his chair. Maya didn't blink. "That report isn't accurate. I checked the figures for Project Elevate. There are fund allocations in there that don't match the city's transparency portal. And 2 of the vendor companies listed don't exist outside of paper." Emily Knox's chair creaked as she leaned forward. "This is absurd," she said, attempting a cool laugh. "She's a child. She doesn't understand what she's talking about." But Maya didn't flinch. "The same vendor was registered to a suburban mailbox in Waco. I found 3 identical invoices with different totals. One of them had your initials at the bottom, Emily." The air stiffened. Richard's hand, still holding the Mont Blanc pen, began to lower. "Maya, how did you even see this report?" he asked carefully. "I was waiting for my mom after school. She works in accounting on the 3rd floor. Someone left a copy on the printer. I took a photo. I wasn't looking for anything, but something felt off. So I compared the numbers, and then I couldn't unsee it. I wasn't looking for anything, but something felt off. So I compared the numbers, and then I couldn't unsee it. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need a title or a podium, just someone brave enough to name it. If this story moved something in you, tap the like button to let us know you're here, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know where this moment is reaching hearts." Emily gave a tight smile, her tone suddenly more urgent. "Rick, let's move on. We've spent weeks verifying these figures with the finance team and the attorneys. We can't delay the process every time someone makes a dramatic claim. Just sign the report. The underwriters are already prepped." Richard didn't respond. "Darling," she added, softer now, "don't let emotion cloud your judgment. We're doing this together, remember?" But that was precisely what made Richard pause. Emily's urgency, her sudden push to sign, the way she'd brushed off Maya's concern with rehearsed dismissal instead of disbelief. Richard looked again at Maya. Her eyes weren't angry. They were steady, scared, maybe, but not wrong. "I'd like a few hours," he said finally, setting the pen down beside the report. "Rick," Emily began, her voice rising slightly. "I said a few hours," he repeated, more firmly this time. Emily's jaw clenched, but she nodded. The room began to clear, murmurs passing between the executives like wind through dry leaves. Maya didn't wait to be thanked. She turned and walked quietly out of the room, leaving behind a single sentence that rang louder than any boardroom debate. "Numbers don't lie, but someone here is." As the door closed, Richard remained seated, staring at the report, no longer a symbol of progress, but a question waiting for an answer. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure which part of his empire was real and which part had been carefully, dangerously constructed to deceive. Richard Stratton didn't leave the boardroom right away. Long after the others had filed out and the door hissed closed behind Maya, he sat in silence, the report still lying in front of him like a confession unsigned. The words of his goddaughter echoed in his mind, sharp, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. "Numbers don't lie, but someone here is." It wasn't the first time something had felt off. Not obvious. Just small moments. Tiny inconsistencies. Emily missing a few meetings, citing last-minute calls with finance counsel, budget reviews rushed, vendor names that blurred together, never questioned. And yet, he had brushed it all aside, because trusting Emily had become convenient. He reached for the report again, and flipped to the Project Elevate section. A $12.4 million line item for community outreach, a subvendor called Bridgecore Solutions, another called Horizon Grantworks. On paper, they sounded legitimate, but in his stomach, something pulled tight. At 7 p.m., Richard arrived home. His penthouse overlooked Allen Parkway, the city lights glowing dimly against the early evening haze. Emily was already there, standing barefoot in the kitchen, swirling wine in a long-stemmed glass. "You didn't sign," she said without turning. "I said I needed time," Richard replied, slipping off his blazer and hanging it neatly on the back of a chair. Emily finally looked at him. "I understand she's your goddaughter, but letting a teenager derail a process this big, that's not like you." He studied her face. There was no fear, no guilt, just irritation masked with calm. "I'm not derailed," he said. "I'm verifying. Maya made a serious claim. She's a kid, Rick. You really think she understands financial models? These reports went through 4 levels of review: legal, accounting, underwriting." He held up a hand. "And yet you told me to sign it today, urgently, because delays make us look weak. Wall Street is watching." She said one of the companies is a shell. He moved closer, voice quiet. "Bridgecore. Know anything about that?" Emily smiled faintly. "I'd have to check with the accounts team. They handle subcontractor verifications." Richard tilted his head. "Is that the same team you reorganized last quarter?" She didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to her wine, swirled it, sipped. He watched her carefully. He didn't want to believe it. Not again. Not after everything he'd rebuilt this company, his trust, his personal life. But the pattern was all too familiar. Charm, precision, and the subtle way Emily always controlled the pace. "Did you ever meet Maya's mother?" he asked suddenly. Emily glanced at him, surprised. "Once. At that holiday gala you hosted, years ago." "Why?" "She died thinking this company stood for something real." Emily's smile faltered. Richard leaned against the counter. "I'm going to look into the report. Personally, I won't accuse anyone yet, but if Maya's right, we'll need to pull everything. You're letting sentiment make you paranoid." "No," he said evenly. "I'm letting the facts speak." Later that night, he called Tara Mendes. The seasoned attorney picked up on the second ring. Her voice clipped and alert even at 9:45 p.m. "You sound like you've seen a ghost." "Something worse," Richard replied. "I need you to look into a vendor listed in our financials, quietly. Bridgecore Solutions. Also, Horizon Grantworks. I want to know if they're real." Tara paused. "Fake vendors in a pre-IPO filing, that's criminal exposure." "I know. Who signed off?" He didn't answer immediately. "Just start digging, and I want you to do it off-grid. Nothing through my office." "Understood," she said. "Give me 24 hours. By midnight, Richard sat alone in his study, staring at the skyline through the tall windows. On his desk lay the open folder Maya had brought. She'd included copies of the city's public transparency portal highlighted in bright yellow and handwritten notes comparing the listed recipients to actual public records. In one margin she had scribbled, "Company ID not found. Check P.O. box address. Matching zip code to unrelated business. Suspicious overlap." He exhaled slowly. She was 17, and she had done the job of 3 internal auditors in a weekend. He picked up his phone and called Evelyn, Maya's mother's sister, who had taken care of the girl since the funeral. "Rick?" Evelyn answered, groggy. "Is everything okay?" "Yes. Maya's safe, right? She's home?" "She's in bed. Why?" "She did something tonight. Brave, but it might ruffle people. I just wanted to make sure she's protected." There was silence on the other end. Then Evelyn's voice softer. "She's always been like that. Quiet, watchful. Doesn't say much until it really matters." Richard rubbed his temple. "I owe her." "No," Evelyn said gently. "You promised her mother. That's not a debt. That's family." The next morning, Richard arrived at the office early. Before the assistants, before the coffee carts rolled in. He sat in his glass-walled office with the lights dimmed, the report in front of him, and Maya's notes beside it. And as the city woke outside, Richard made a silent vow. He would find out who falsified those numbers. He would protect Maya. And if necessary, he would burn the whole damn deal down himself. Because nothing he built was worth signing a lie. By the time the office filled with voices and the hum of elevators, Richard Stratton was already halfway through his second review of the vendor contracts. His desk was cluttered in a way it hadn't been in years, papers spread out, coffee growing cold. Maya's folder pinned open with a gold paperweight in the shape of a lion. At exactly 9:04 a.m., Jordan, his executive assistant, stepped into the office holding an iPad and 2 coffees. "You're in early," Jordan said, setting one of the cups down. "Want me to prep the media notes for the IPO announcement this Friday?" Richard looked up, his expression unreadable. "Not yet." Jordan paused. "Something wrong?" "Close the door," Richard said. When the lock clicked shut, Richard leaned forward. "Jordan, you've been here 5 years. You remember everything." "I try." Bridgecore Solutions. Ever met someone from that team?" Jordan frowned. "They're listed under Emily's outreach program. I've only ever seen them mentioned in quarterly recaps. No in-person meetings, no calls." Richard nodded. "Pull every invoice, email chain, and PO tied to Bridgecore and Horizon Grant Works." Jordan hesitated. "That's going to raise flags, sir." "I'm aware. Do it anyway." "And Jordan." "Yes? If anything happens, anything unusual, you come straight to me. No one else." The young man gave a short nod and left the room, his steps faster than when he came in. "At 10:47 a.m., Tara called back. "I found your ghost," she said without preamble. "Bridgecore was registered in Delaware 8 months ago under a shell corporation. No employees listed, no physical location. And Horizon? It's tied to the same mailing address. Both companies list their emergency contact as a Michael Knox." Richard's grip tightened around the phone. "Emily's brother." "Correct. And there's more. Financial records show these 2 entities were funneling funds back into a private account labeled consultancy fees. The routing number traces to an offshore account in the Caymans." Richard stood slowly from his chair and walked to the window. "She's using our report to launder money through a fake community fund. Looks that way. And if I'd signed it." "You would have gone to prison," Tara said flatly. "At minimum, SEC violations. At worst, federal charges. The fact that the paperwork was designed to look clean until audit tells me someone inside your firm knows how to dance with red tape." Richard rubbed his temple. "This goes beyond bad faith. It's fraud, Rick. Intentional, coordinated, and deeply buried. Can you build a case?" "I already started," she replied. "But you'll need one more thing, someone inside. A name, a voice, a witness to prove you didn't know." Richard's mind went to Jordan, loyal, quiet, observant, but too afraid to speak. And then it landed on Maya. "No," he thought. "I've put enough on that girl already." He ended the call and turned back to his desk. That's when he noticed it. A printed copy of a reimbursement form. It was tucked beneath the main report left behind, perhaps, from yesterday's meeting. The signature at the bottom wasn't his. It was forged. Emily had signed his name. Not with exact imitation, but close enough that it would pass casual scrutiny. But he knew his own hand. And this was betrayal written in ink. By lunch, Richard had made a decision. He called Maya. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Mr. Stratton? Hey kiddo, you busy?" "Just algebra." "Why?" "I'd like to see you. There's something I think you should know. Meet me at the old diner. Your mom's favorite." When Maya arrived, she was wearing the same navy sweatshirt from the night before, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She slid into the booth across from him, the sun from the window lighting the curve of her cheek. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. Richard smiled sadly. "Not yet, but maybe soon." She watched him. "You believe me now?" "I do. And I owe you more than I can say." He slid a photocopy of the vendor registry across the table. "You were right. About everything." Maya's eyes scanned the page quickly. Then she looked up. "So what happens now?" "I'm building a case, quietly, carefully. I have a lawyer, a few people inside I can still trust, but I need time." Maya hesitated. "You know they won't wait. If they know you're not going to sign, they'll find another way to bury it, or bury you." Richard chuckled, but it sounded tired. "I'm aware." She pulled a folded paper from her bag. "Then you'll want this." "What is it?" "It's a zoning complaint I drafted. There's a clause in Project Elevate that claims city approval for a new housing block, but that land was already designated for green space. I confirmed it on the city's public planning map. It's fraudulent." He unfolded the paper slowly, reading the typed paragraphs. Her formatting was clean, her citation flawless. "You did this, alone?" She shrugged. "Google's free." He stared at her for a long moment. You're 17, and you've done more for this company in 3 days than most of my executive team in 3 years. Maya looked down. I didn't do it for the company. He nodded. I know. As they stood to leave, Richard reached out and touched her shoulder. I need you to stay safe, Maya. From here on, they'll see you as a threat. She looked him in the eye. Then let them be afraid. Richard watched her walk out into the Houston afternoon, the light catching on the edges of her braid. In his chest, a heaviness lifted. Not all the way, but enough. He knew now. This wasn't just about cleaning up a report. It was about protecting the truth, and the girl who dared to speak it. The sun was just beginning to set when Maya stepped off the city bus near her apartment complex. She pulled her hoodie tighter as the wind picked up, her backpack thudding softly against her side. The streets were familiar, the cracked sidewalks and leaning mailboxes like quiet old neighbors, but tonight, something felt different. She noticed it before she reached the stairs. A black SUV parked half a block away. Windows tinted, engine off, still as a statue. She didn't stop walking, just moved a little faster, turned the corner into the courtyard, then slipped inside her building without looking back. Upstairs, Evelyn was at the stove, sautéing onions in a cast-iron skillet. She turned as Maya walked in, her smile fading when she saw the girl's face. What is it? There's a car parked outside, Maya said. It hasn't moved since I got off the bus. I think someone's watching. Evelyn wiped her hands on a dish towel, moved to the window, and peeked through the blinds. Her shoulders stiffened. You're sure? They didn't follow me. But they're not just passing through either. Evelyn crossed to the kitchen table, picked up the landline, and dialed. I'm calling Richard. Maya didn't argue. She sat down and tried not to let her hands shake. 20 minutes later, Richard stood outside the apartment door, flanked by 2 plainclothes security personnel. He looked more tired than usual, his collar slightly askew, tie loosened, but his voice was steady. You did the right thing calling me, he told Evelyn, stepping inside. You both okay? We're fine, Evelyn said, her voice clipped. But I don't like the look of this. Richard turned to one of the guards. Park down the block, switch cars every shift. I don't want anyone tailing them without knowing we see it. The man nodded and left. Maya finally spoke. Is it because of the report? Richard met her eyes. Yes, and because of what you found today. That zoning complaint? That wasn't just sharp, Maya. That was dangerous to someone who has a lot to lose. You think they're trying to scare me? I think they're trying to see if you'll stay quiet. Maya exhaled slowly. I won't. He nodded once. I know. They talked for another 10 minutes. Richard gave Evelyn his direct number again, this time on a new business card. This line's secure, he said. If anything feels off, call, day or night. As he stood to leave, he turned back to Maya. Tomorrow morning. I want you to meet me downtown. There's something I need to show you. The next day, Maya waited in front of the Stratton Capitol Tower. The glass reflected the morning sun like a blade. People passed her in tailored suits and polished shoes, none of them paying attention to the teenage girl in jeans and a plain white tee. At exactly 8:15, Richard stepped out and waved her inside. The lobby was cavernous marble floors, long panes of sunlight spilling across clean lines and silver fixtures, but Richard didn't stop there. He led her through a side hallway, down a quiet stairwell, and into a basement level where few employees ever went. This is our records room, he said, unlocking a reinforced door with a digital key code. Most of the company's internal documents are digital now, but some of the originals, they're still kept here, for legal reasons. They entered a cool, dim corridor filled with locked filing cabinets and steel shelves. I've been looking at every version of the Project Elevate proposal since its inception. Emily submitted the first one last year, but here, he pulled a binder from a low shelf, is where the pattern starts. Maya stepped closer. The pages were lined with notes, initials, and revisions. She changed the scope 3 times, Richard explained. Each time, the vendor names stayed the same, but the budget increased, quietly, and none of those changes went through the board. Maya flipped through the tabs. She slipped it through? She orchestrated the timing so the changes landed during holiday closures, buried them in subcommittee minutes. I missed it. Maya looked up at him. That wasn't your fault. Richard gave a small, sad smile. It is. I let my trust get ahead of my caution, and she knew it. They went through 2 more binders before Maya stopped. Wait, what's this? She pointed to a scanned PD-Fan invoice addressed to Northbridge Consulting. It had been processed under the Elevate budget, signed off by R. Stratton. That's not your signature, she said immediately. Richard leaned in, his jaw tensed. Number, it's not. Maya opened her backpack and pulled out her tablet. Remember that routing number I found on the Horizon invoice? I ran it through a public records filter. It matches with Northbridge's bank account. It's the same shell company. He stared at her. You did that last night? She nodded. And there's more. I think the payment trail leads back to one of Emily's old real estate investments, a closed-down church outside of town. On paper, it's a renovation project. But there's no construction permit filed. Richard sat back, stunned. She's using abandoned property to wash the money. That's what it looks like. He stood, then paced once. You realize what you've just done? Maya shrugged. Connected dots no one wanted connected. He gave a low chuckle, but his face remained serious. This is more than fraud. It's conspiracy, possibly racketeering. So what now? Maya asked. He looked at her. Now, he said, we gather everything. Because next time we walk into that boardroom, we're not asking questions. We're showing answers. And for the first time in years, Richard Stratton felt something return to his spine that he hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. Not to salvage what was broken, but to burn away the rot and build something clean, starting with the truth, and a 17-year-old girl who refused to stay silent. That afternoon, Richard sat alone in his top-floor office, the city of Houston sprawling below him, quiet under the press of early summer heat. The blinds were half drawn, diffusing the sunlight into soft gold that didn't quite reach his desk. His computer screen glowed dimly in front of him, and on it, the routing trail Maya had uncovered blinked like a digital heartbeat. From Northbridge to Horizon, to Bridgecore, to an unmarked account in the Caymans, each transfer tucked neatly behind consulting fees and PR allocations, all signed off with his name, all forged. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the weight of it pressed into his ribs. Emily, the woman he had nearly proposed to 3 months ago, the woman who had helped draft the IPO press release and picked the champagne for the celebration he now knew would never happen, his fiancée, his CFO, the one person he'd let too close. A knock came at the door. Jordan stepped in, carefully closing it behind him. Sir, I think you should see this. He held out a flash drive, his hand shaking slightly. What is it? Richard asked. Jordan glanced around, lowered his voice. A call recording. I wasn't supposed to be on the line. Emily didn't know I was still connected when she spoke with Michael Knox. She mentioned you. Said if the plan didn't work, they'd pin it all on you. Said your name was the best shield money could buy. Richard felt his chest go hollow. You have it recorded? Jordan nodded. I didn't know what to do, but after yesterday I couldn't sit on it anymore. Richard took the flash drive, his hand firm. You did the right thing. There's one more thing, Jordan added, hesitating. It says someone tried to delete Maya's file from the internal server last night. It was flagged and blocked, but the attempt came from Emily's admin login. Richard didn't speak. He simply turned back toward the window. Later that evening, Richard pulled up outside a familiar restaurant in Midtown. Marseille, high-end, discreet, with a private corner booth she always preferred. Emily was already inside when he arrived, seated with perfect posture, a glass of rosé in front of her, and her signature pearl earrings gleaming beneath the chandelier light. You look tired, she said as he slid into the booth across from her. I am, he answered, tired of pretending. Emily's smile froze, then recalibrated. What's that supposed to mean? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a printout Maya's zoning complaint, stamped and verified by city records. He laid it on the table between them. You lied to me, he said quietly. You lied to everyone. Emily didn't touch the paper. Her fingers stayed curled gently around the stem of her glass. I don't know what you think you've found. I found the shell companies, the false invoices, the offshore accounts, the forged signature on a document filed in my name. And I have the routing numbers, Emily. I have the recording. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Instead, She leaned forward and said in the same voice she'd used during quarterly earnings calls, "Then you better hope none of it leads to you." Richard stared at her. "That's the game, Rick," she said. "You can claim innocence all you want, but your name's on every document, every report, every file. The board won't care what Maya found. They'll care about what you signed, or what they think you signed. You forged my name. You trusted me to handle it. No one will question that. You were always too proud to ask for the details. And now, if this IPO dies, it's not just your company, it's your legacy." He sat back slowly. "So that's the plan. Burn the house down and hope the smoke hides the bodies." Emily finished her wine in one slow sip. "I'm not the one lighting matches." He left the restaurant without another word. The moment his car door closed, he pulled out his phone and called Tara. "I'm ready." "You have what we need?" she asked. "I have more than enough, and I'm not hiding behind anything anymore." Oh. That night, Richard met Tara and Jordan in a private underground garage beneath a government building downtown. He handed over the flash drive, Maya's folder, the zoning complaint, the forged documents, and a new file photos of Emily and her brother meeting twice in the past week, taken by a hired investigator. They were laughing, sharing a drink, reviewing something on a tablet. "She never even flinched," Richard said, voice flat. "She doesn't think she'll be touched." Tara's expression hardened. "Then we'll make sure she's wrong." As they parted ways, Richard stood in the dim yellow light of the garage and looked down at his briefcase. It had once held contracts, profit statements, presentations. Now, it held evidence, proof of betrayal, and the only path left toward the truth. By midnight, Maya received a text. From Richard. "Tomorrow morning. Conference room 5B. You're coming with me. They need to hear it from both of us." She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm ready." Richard sat at his desk long after the city went to sleep. The report still lay there unsigned, unshredded. A reminder of how close he had come to becoming another silent signature in a sea of corruption. He turned off the light. Tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. Not in whispers, but in full, undeniable light. At 9 a.m. sharp, the boardroom on the 23rd floor of Whitmore Holdings was already half full. The morning sun poured through the towering windows, casting clean lines of light across the long oak table. Suits and ties rustled. Coffee steamed in branded mugs. There was tension in the air, not the usual tension of quarterly earnings, but something thicker, more electric, like a storm that had yet to break. Richard entered first. No assistant, no entourage, just a plain leather folder under his arm, and a look that made several board members sit a little straighter in their chairs. Moments later, Maya stepped in behind him. The room went still. She wore a navy blazer over a modest dress and held her tablet tightly against her chest. Her hair was pulled back, exposing a calm, unreadable face that mirrored her godfather's. Some in the room recognized her. Others whispered. But no one questioned why she was there not yet. Richard took his seat at the head of the table and gestured for Maya to sit beside him. Across from them sat Emily, cool and polished as ever, a crisp white blouse tucked into a charcoal pencil skirt. Her lips curled slightly at the corners, her eyes flicking to Maya only dismissively. She adjusted a stack of binders in front of her and said, "Shall we begin?" Richard looked around the room, meeting each board member's eyes before speaking. "Before we discuss the IPO schedule, there's something more urgent, something that affects every one of you, this company, and its future." A few murmurs. One of the older board members, Gregory Talbot, furrowed his brow. "What is this about, Richard?" He opened the folder. "It's about fraud and trust, and how both have been violated at the highest level." He handed the first few pages down the table. "You'll find verified financial records routing paths, shell accounts, forged approvals, all tied back to documents I supposedly signed." He turned to Emily. "Documents I never saw." Emily let out a short, practiced laugh. "Richard, if this is about our disagreement last week, I suggest we speak privately." "I'm not finished," he cut in, his voice firm. "This is Maya William. Many of you know she's my goddaughter. What you may not know is that she was the one who caught the first inconsistency, a zoning discrepancy buried in the Bridgecore proposal." Maya stood. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady. The coordinates were tied to a non-existent site, The report said it was cleared and approved, but the city planning office has no such record. From there, I followed the transaction chain. She tapped her tablet. Behind them, the screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a flowchart of money moving through 3 shell companies. The room fell silent. "That's absurd," Emily said. "You're trusting a teenager's detective work over our professional audit team?" "She's not a teenager in this room," Richard said quietly. "She's a whistleblower, and her findings have already been verified by our outside legal team." He gestured toward the corner where Tara, their head counsel, stood. She nodded once. Gregory leaned forward. "This is serious. Are you accusing Emily of embezzlement?" Richard didn't flinch. "I'm accusing her of orchestrating a fraudulent financial scheme, using my name and signature to funnel funds into accounts we were never meant to see. And I have a recording of her admitting, in a private call with Michael Knox, that the plan was to use me as a shield." The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Chairs scraped. Emily stood slowly, her face pale now, but composed. "This is character assassination. There is no proof that I—" Tara stepped forward, holding up a flash drive. "This contains the audio. You'll all hear it soon." One of the board members asked, "Why would you bring this up here, now, instead of handling it internally?" Richard's voice softened. "Because for too long, we've handled things behind closed doors quietly, respectfully, and wrongly. This time, the damage is too great to conceal. If we want to restore trust, we start by telling the truth. In the light." Emily's expression changed barely. Her hand twitched as if to reach for her bag, then stopped. Maya looked at her, calm but unblinking. "You tried to erase me from the system last night, but I'm still here." For the first time, a crack appeared in Emily's facade. "You don't know what you're doing," she said, almost to herself. "You think you understand how this world works? You don't. You never will." "No," Maya replied softly. "But I know the difference between right and wrong." The board sat stunned. After a long moment, Gregory cleared his throat. "We'll need to review everything. Legal will need full access. And Emily, I'm afraid we'll need you to step out while we begin." She stared at Richard, and something dark passed between them: regret, anger, or perhaps the last flicker of something that had once resembled trust. She picked up her purse and walked out without another word. When the door clicked shut behind her, silence fell again. Then Richard looked to Maya. "Thank you for not staying quiet." She smiled faintly. "You once told me justice doesn't shout. It just waits for the right room to speak." He smiled back, pride welling behind his eyes, then turned to the board. "Now, let's clean house." And just like that, the reckoning began not in rage, but in resolve. Not with fists, but with facts. And at the center of it all stood a 17-year-old girl with a calm voice, a steady hand, and the courage to say, "This isn't right." Because sometimes, the truth doesn't need to roar. It only needs to be heard. Outside the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with quiet chaos. Emily's heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floor as she exited, her face expressionless but her pace slightly too fast. Down the corridor, staff paused mid-step, sensing something unusual, but no one dared ask. By the time she reached the executive elevator, her hands trembled. She pulled out her phone, dialing a number she never thought she'd use again. "It's not going as planned," she whispered. "She knows," the girl, Maya. On the other end, a male voice responded coldly. "Then you need to disappear for now." The elevator doors closed before she could reply. Back upstairs, in Richard's office, the aftermath of the bombshell was settling into motion. Legal had already begun cataloging the evidence. IT teams were tracing the access logs. HR was quietly preparing interim leadership roles. Richard stood by the window, watching the city below, but his mind wasn't on the skyline. It was on the betrayal, the one he should have seen, the one he nearly let happen under his own signature. Maya sat quietly on the corner sofa, knees tucked, eyes tired but alert. He turned to her, voice soft. "How did you first suspect her?" She hesitated a moment. It was how she smiled during the Bridgecore pitch. Too fast, too rehearsed, like she already knew it was approved. She looked down. "And she used your signature in a font you never use." He blinked. "You caught that?" "You taught me to," she said, managing a small smile. There was a knock. Tara stepped in, holding a thick file. "We found something," she said. Emily made a phone call just before the presentation, encrypted, routed through 3 VPNs. But our team traced the endpoint. It leads to a private intelligence firm. Not cheap, not legal. Richard took the file slowly. She wasn't working alone. "No," Tara said. "And that's not all." She handed Maya a printout. "This is your high school enrollment form. Someone tried to alter the records twice. Once to expunge your disciplinary file, and once to mark you as having a history of behavioral instability." Maya's face tightened. "They wanted to discredit me." "They tried," Richard said gently, "but they failed." Maya's eyes burned, not with fear, but focus. She's not running alone. Someone paid her. She doesn't need the money, she needs protection. She's covering for someone bigger. Richard turned to Tara. "Get Knox in here, now." Half an hour later, Michael Knox entered, his tailored gray suit flawless, but his expression tense. Richard wasted no time. "You once vouched for Emily, said she'd never move a dollar without documentation. Care to explain these?" He tossed down the forged papers, the shell company records, and a timeline of her calls. Knox's eyes scanned the documents. Slowly, he sat down, his fingers lacing together. "You're assuming I knew, didn't you?" Richard asked. "No," Knox replied, meeting his gaze. "I suspected she was hiding something, but I thought it was personnel nothing that would affect the firm." "Then explain this," Maya said, holding up her tablet. "On the 4th of March, she made a wire transfer to a Cayman account registered to Marigold Estates LLC. You're listed as an authorized user on that company's registration." Knox flinched. For a moment, the room was silent. Then he sighed. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Marigold was insurance, a slush fund in case the board pushed back on the acquisition. "Emily moved the money without telling me the source." "That's not a mistake," Maya said. "That's collusion." Knox leaned forward. "I didn't know she'd forged the reports. I didn't know she'd put Maya in danger. But yes, I let the money go through. I told myself I was protecting the company." "No," Richard said. "You were protecting yourself." Knox looked down. He had no defense. "I'll step down," he said quietly. "Effective immediately." Tara nodded. "We'll need a full statement. Legal's already drafting charges. If you cooperate, it may help." As Knox left the office, Richard turned to Maya. "I don't know how much of this you were prepared for." "None of it," she replied honestly. "But I'm still here." He smiled. "You're more like your father than you know." She blinked, her throat tightening at the mention. He would have said something like, "Truth is quiet, but when it speaks, it doesn't stutter." Outside, clouds began to gather over the skyline. Storm was coming, but inside that office, something had cleared. It wasn't over. Emily was still out there, and there was still a network to uncover. But for the first time, they had a name, a trail, and a girl brave enough to follow it. The next morning broke cold and gray, the kind of overcast Austin sky that made even the glass towers of downtown feel muted. In the penthouse office of Rains Global, Richard sat at his desk, eyes fixed on the small photo tucked inside a weathered leather notebook. Maya, at age 8, beaming beside her late father, Jamal William. After a camping trip near Lake Travis, Richard's fingers brushed the edge of the image. His goddaughter had grown into the kind of woman he used to believe only existed in story sharp, brave, unshakably honest. And now, that honesty had torn a hole through the center of his firm. The door opened softly. Maya stepped in, wrapped in a long coat, her hair still damp from the mist outside. "Morning," she said. "Morning, kiddo," he replied, gesturing to the seat across from him. "You sleep at all?" "A few hours," she said. "Enough to know I'm not crazy. Emily's still out there, and she's probably watching." Richard nodded. "We have our team on her financials. She's got properties in Belize, Vancouver, a few LLCs registered in Nevada and Wyoming. She didn't plan this overnight. And whoever she's covering for," Maya added, "they're not going to sit still." Tara entered carrying a slim envelope. "Intercepted this through one of Emily's shell companies," she said. "No return address. But it was meant for you." Richard took it, slid a letter opener along the seal. Inside was a single sheet of linen paper, typed in bold serif font, just one sentence. Tell the girl to stop, or the next signature she sees will be on a death certificate. Maya leaned over, reading the line. Then she leaned back, eyes narrowing. So now they threaten me? Richard folded the paper and placed it gently on the desk. They're scared. Tara tapped her tablet. We've got a potential location. Emily accessed a secure cloud file from a VPN pinging off a property in Galveston. We cross-referenced utility bill sits in the name of Delilah Knox. Michael's sister? Maya asked. Exactly. We think Emily may be hiding there. Richard stood. We go carefully. I don't want you involved in the retrieval, Maya. I'm not sitting this out, she said calmly. I'm not asking you to storm the gates, but I need you here. If Emily's smart, she left a backdoor something digital. Something we can use to nail the whole web. Tara nodded. We'll handle Galveston. But Maya, check your father's old files. If anyone knew how to move unnoticed, it was Jamal. Maya returned to her apartment that evening, the wind rustling through the oak branches outside her window. She pulled out the old fireproof box from her closet, the one her father told her to keep sealed, until she felt the world stop making sense. It stopped yesterday, she whispered, opening the latch. Inside, yellowed papers, an old pocket recorder, a faded blue keycard marked Southgate Storage, and a small flash drive. She plugged it into her laptop, holding her breath. The folder was titled Phoenix. It opened to reveal audio logs, conversations, snippets of surveillance, most labeled with dates and codes. One stood out, RG0 4.12 Emily, midnight call. She clicked play. Jamal's voice, crisp, steady. This is Jamal William, logging from the home office. I've intercepted a conversation between Emily Lawson and an unidentified male regarding Project Phoenix, a financial acquisition plan using falsified environmental compliance data to inflate market valuation. Emily's voice followed, low, agitated. They won't check the carbon offsets. We file through Green Pillar. Their audit team's a joke. Once it's approved, we sell at the peak and disappear. The man's voice was distorted. And what if Richard finds out? He won't, Emily said confidently. He still thinks I love him. Maya sat back, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't just about money. This was long, calculated, cruel. She called Richard. I have something you need to hear. An hour later, in his private listening room, the audio played in loops. Richard stood frozen, hands on his hips, his jaw clenched as Emily's voice repeated those last chilling words. He still thinks I love him. He shut off the recorder. That's all I needed, he said, voice gravelly. Tara stepped in. Galveston was a bust. House was cleared out. But we recovered surveillance footage. Emily was there 2 days ago. She left with a man late 50s, bald, scar under left eye. We're running facial rec. I know that scar, Richard said quietly. Gerald Maddox, former consultant. Jamal once told me he had dirt on everyone. Maya looked up. So Emily wasn't the top. She was the messenger. She was the bait, Richard said. They were no longer dealing with a finance scandal. They were dealing with a shadow network cone that had been watching, waiting, and now reacting. Outside, the wind began to howl through the glass towers of the city. Inside that quiet room, Maya stood a little taller. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about her father's memory or Richard's trust. It was about truth, and she was holding the match. It was just past midnight when Richard Raines stepped onto the empty rooftop of his downtown building, the wind sharp against his face, his coat flapping like the worn flag that hung behind his desk. Below, Austin's lights flickered like distant embers. He was holding the flash drive Maya had given him in one hand and a manila folder in the other. His jaw was tight. His silence wasn't the silence of doubt, it was the silence before a reckoning. Inside the boardroom the next morning, the tension was thick. Every seat was filled, executives shifting uneasily in their tailored suits, eyes darting toward the head of the table where Richard stood, still silent. Maya sat near the far end, dressed in a charcoal blazer and jeans, her fingers calmly laced together, her gaze unwavering. Tara stood behind Richard, arms crossed, eyes scanning for any sudden movements. Finally, Richard spoke. Before we begin, he said, his voice low but steady, I want to thank each of you for showing up. It's not easy sitting in a room where the walls have been listening. A few confused glances passed between the executives. He continued. This company was built on truth, on trust. But in the last 2 years, someone decided profit mattered more than principle. He turned to the projection screen behind him and nodded to Tara. The screen lit up with the audio Maya had unearthed. Emily's voice crackled through the speakers. They won't check the carbon offsets. Once it's approved, we sell at the peak and disappear. The room went still. Some gasped. Others dropped their gazes. No one moved. Then Richard clicked again, this time displaying a spreadsheet cross-referencing fake environmental data, shell company transfers, and most damning board members' signatures on suspicious approvals. I was fooled, he said plainly, and I owe every honest employee here an apology, but what I won't do is let this slide. He reached into the folder and began sliding copies across the table. Effective immediately, I am freezing all accounts linked to Green Pillar Holdings, revoking Emily Lawson's access to company systems, and opening formal cooperation with federal investigators. One of the older board members, a Mr. Pritchard, leaned forward. And the rest of us? You have 2 choices, Richard said. Help me clean this or pack your offices by noon. No one spoke. Then a slow clap echoed from the hallway. Emily stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 suited men private security, judging by the earpieces. Her face was calm, even amused. Dramatic, she said, but a little late. You're trespassing, Tara warned. I still own shares, Emily replied. You can't silence me that easily. I don't need to, Richard said. Your voice already did the damage. We have the recordings, the paper trail, even the offshore accounts. And these gentlemen behind me? He nodded toward 2 federal agents entering from the opposite door. They've been waiting for you. For a heartbeat, Emily's confidence faltered. She turned, but the agents were already behind her. Emily Lawson, one of them said, you're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud investors. As they cuffed her, she turned toward Richard. You still think this ends with me? She said, almost laughing. You don't know who you're really up against. Richard didn't flinch. Maybe not. But I do know what truth sounds like, and it doesn't sound like you. Emily was escorted out in silence. The boardroom remained frozen. The damage wasn't just reputational, it was personal. For Richard, for the employees, and most of all, for Maya. Later that afternoon, Richard and Maya stood on the rooftop where it all began. The sky was clearer now, the wind softer. Maya held a mug of hot cocoa in both hands, steam curling around her face. You did more than save a company, Richard said quietly. She looked up. I just told the truth. Truth is never just, he replied. It's the rarest thing we have. She smiled faintly. I think my dad would have liked that. He would have been proud. I know I am. He handed her an envelope. She looked at it hesitantly. What's this? A scholarship, he said. Full ride. Any school. Any program. Your call. Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she said, only if I get to intern at Rains Global next summer. He laughed. You've already been running the place. They stood quietly for a long while, the city humming below them. The sun was beginning to set, casting gold light over the skyline. Maya took a deep breath. You know, she said, sometimes justice doesn't come like thunder. It comes like a whisper. Richard nodded. And sometimes, he added, that whisper is enough to bring down an empire. The rooftop fell into silence again, but this time, it was peaceful. This time, it was earned.